Okay. I feel like this is at an awkward angle. There we go. That would be better. Okay, welcome, guys. That's why I shift this back. There we go. We are here for modal verbs. Modal verbs. First, so Igor recently upgraded his membership from supporter to English hacker. So thank you, Igor. You guys can become a member by clicking the join button, the blue join button below the video. If you're watching the replay, sorry you missed us, but you can join us next time. Sometimes we talk about prepositions, general grammar, pronunciation. It depends. I will also mention really quick. So apparently the StreamYard free plan, as you can see the little StreamYard logo, I'm streaming through that. It has limited usage. And because I'm streaming so much, it gives you 20 hours in a month. And we have already used 13 and a half of those hours, which means by the end of the month, we probably, actually not even by the end of the month, before the end of the month, we will run out of hours. And I've been doing this daily experiment, but if I run out of time on the free plan, I can just switch to live streaming straight from YouTube temporarily. So it's not the biggest thing, but I do like StreamYard because I can, click these and bring them up, and it's a little more interactive and stuff. Hello, Fernando. So we'll see how things go. Richard is here. Welcome, Richard. And Ganeshali, welcome. King Lion is here. Igor is also here. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Igor, for you told me that you upgraded your subscription or your membership. So thank you for that. Let's jump in to live here. So basically, we're going to be doing an interesting thing here. At least I think you guys will think I think you guys will think it's interesting. Should be useful either way. So we're talking about modal verbs, and I should bring up my notes here. Lesson notes. Of course, I closed that. Drive. Let's see here. So we're going to be going, there's lots and lots and lots that we can get into, different ways that we can tackle this. We're going to be doing a few different things, and there will definitely be either future lessons or other lives where we can dive more deeply into certain aspects. But I could easily do like a 2-3 hour thing on this. Okay, I want live lesson notes. There we go. So we're going to bring this over here. Shorten you. And we're going to come back over to our stream. Okay, so basically what's happening is we're going to start by talking really quick about shall, should, and ought to. Shall, should, and ought to. Now, there's a reason I'm beginning with these because we're not going to spend a lot of time on them today. But if we do shall, okay, shall, because I know there's some of you out there who are still taught shall, especially if you learn British English. In American English, you never, ever, 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 ever have to use shall. It's an old word. It's pretty much outdated. We do still use it when you are, what's that word I'm looking for? Not permission, but when you're, I can't think of the word right now. Come on. You're inviting, you're creating an invitation. So, and it's not necessarily just because like, oh, I invited him. It's very, very specific, and it sounds kind of fancy. It sounds kind of formal. We tend to use it, at least if you're, say like a millennial or younger. This might also apply to Gen X, my parents, where we use it in sort of a fancy way. So like, shall we go? Right. So like you and your friend or whatever are going to go to a movie or whatever, or to a sports game. And it's sort of like a fancy, fun way to ask, like, are you ready? Like, are we ready to leave? Are we going to leave now? So you say, shall we go? Usually with sort of this like positive intonation. And you never even have to do that, right? There's plenty of ways that you can express that same idea. So my recommendation for you to keep things nice and simple, there's a garbage truck outside, sorry, is to just don't worry about using shall. Okay, that's the only time that you would ever really use it, and it's an old thing. Now, one thing I will note really quick here about shall, in the past, shall was the first person version, so the I version of the future. So I shall do it. So instead of saying I will do it, I shall do it. But we don't do that anymore. I guess we can also use it there it's very, very uncommon. It's just like what I described about the invitation. It's a special sort of fancy way if you want to sound sort of sophisticated or whatever in a playful way. It has nothing to do with like, oh, I'm more educated or, blah, blah, blah. Like it's just like, oh yeah, I shall do that tomorrow, or we shall see, whatever. So you never have to use shall. Should, really quick with Igor here, your channel is a diamond, at least to me, in the world of YouTube stones. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Should has 6 meanings. It's complicated. It is a modal verb that has sort of consolidated uses over time. And we're not going to get too big into should today because of that. But what I will say is there's sort of a simplification of this where there's really only 3 core usages, which is, I pulled this up on my phone just so I don't forget them all, because I'm horrible of thinking of specifics on the spot. Remembering details, that's one of my weaknesses. It's always a strength to be aware of your weaknesses, right? Because then you can plan around them. So one meaning is like ought to. Okay, we're gonna come back to ought to in a second. And that's like there's some sort of duty or like it would be best to do this. So an obligation, a duty, something that would be best, the best option. So like I don't know, you should ignore shall. All right, so that would be the best thing to do. Just ignore shall. You should ignore shall. The second meaning is used to express an expectation. So this ties into a complex with would and could that we're going to get to later and probably talk about more in future sessions or classes or videos. And this is where you say like, okay, well, I should be there by 5. So maybe I plan to leave at 4:30. I'm going to drive there. It only takes a half an hour, but maybe there's traffic, maybe something happens that delays me, but I'm pretty sure I'm giving you an idea, like you should expect me, or you can expect me by 5, right? And if I'm not there by 5, then maybe I had some sort of issue. So it sounds less firm. If I say I will be there by 5, it sounds more firm. Like it's just a future statement, like by 5, I'm going to be there. And it's less about objective reality because there could still be traffic, right? But you're making a very firm statement that the person, you're telling the person that that's reliable, or it should be reliable. See, trying to explain certain things without using other modal verbs is kind of hard sometimes. But then if you should, it sounds a little bit lighter. Like, I don't know, this is the plan. Expect it, but who knows? It might be a little bit later. Okay. The third basic meaning of should would be to express a correction. Okay. So a lot of the time, you guys in the comments or in the chat, let's say you say, I saw a movie called, and then you do this. We'll just say Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Okay. And you'll put it in parentheses. I see this a lot from Arabic speakers. I think also Russian speakers. I don't know if that's the punctuation that you use in your language for that, but whenever we have like a title or a quote or something that we want to make stand out, we use quotation marks. Right? That's what I call quotation marks. In this case, it's the title, but so we would put, Harry Potter. And of course, you could just be lazy and not put those, but that would be like the title. Okay. So let's say I'm going to give you a correction. Okay, so you use the parentheses. So instead of writing, let's say I respond to your comment, or I give you feedback here, and I say, "Oh, you should use quotation marks instead of parentheses." Okay, so it's a correction. Now there is a reason under the surface. These are connected, just like with the prepositions. Modal verbs work the same way. Okay. That I have not mapped out yet, and that's one reason why we're not going to go into extreme detail with should. But all of these are somehow linked under the surface. I did a little bit of initial research on that in the past, and I feel pretty firm saying that, even though I haven't mapped it all out yet. So that's should. It's a little complicated, right? Russian speakers, probably, yeah. It's a very short, quick way to say probably. We don't usually spell it that way, but you can if you want to convey that it's that sort of quick, lazy way to say it, probably. Tap on accidentally. I don't know how you, I understand tapping on one parenthesis, but tapping on two at the end of what you just put in between the two, that doesn't sound like an accident. Anyway. So then we go to ought to, and ought to, like we said, that's one of the meanings of should. Ought to, I think, has a couple different applications that it can mean, but ought to basically just means like it's a duty or an obligation. And some of these things can be further subdivided. I think there's technically like 3 uses of ought and 3 uses of should. And they kind of, because I looked this up a long time ago when I was teaching it, they kind of like roughly correspond, but we don't really use ought to very much, and so should sort of like took them all over. And so you can use, and they're like subtle different flavors between should and ought to, but because they're so subtle and similar, they just kind of got took over by should. And so should has a lot of subtleties in the potential expression based on the context. And again, that's another reason why we're not going to get into this too much, but you will still hear people use ought to. It does still exist. It's not like shall. Shall, it almost doesn't really exist. You never have to use it. Ought to, you don't have to use either. My recommendation is just ignore it, never use it. It doesn't matter. Just understand if somebody says it, go based off the context of what they probably mean. If you understand should really well in all its meanings, then you'll be able to kind of figure out what ought to means based on the context. But again, the basics is like an obligation or a duty or something like that. So I think ought to is also much more common in the southern region of the U.S. Again, the southern doesn't just mean the South, like the whole southern part of the country. It's sort of from Texas up through like Virginia and North Carolina in there. That's what we call the South. So unless you're learning that version of American English, which I'm not teaching, so I'm not sure why you're here, you definitely don't have to worry about it. Okay, so that's shall, should, and ought to. Pretty simple. We got that out of the way. We'll be talking more about some of those details another time. Okay, so this is a good relevant question. Are these modal verbs, so we have are and are, so we don't want the second are there because this is a question. The first one's good. Are these modal verbs still used in legal jargon because they can be interpreted in different ways depending on the context? Always wondered why they make things sound so complicated. Yes, so when there's legal jargon, so jargon is a word that kind of just means like terms, it's like within a special field. So when you are crafting a legal document, obviously especially in a language like English, where we tend to kind of have like a lot of potential ambivalence, like lack of clear meaning. Like many things can have multiple meanings depending on how you look at them. And then because the modals tend to have multiple usages, of course, usually we just rely on context and everyday communication. It's not a big deal. If somebody misunderstands you on a rare occasion, then you can clarify, you can say it a different way. But if it's legal and somebody's going to sign this and it can be interpreted multiple ways, that creates loopholes, that creates, things that weren't intended. Um, and so lawyers painstakingly try to word documents and stuff in a way that it can't be misinterpreted, et cetera, et cetera. It specifically means exactly this. And so there's a lot of very formal language. There's a lot of sometimes like more traditional phrasings or really fancy phrasings that we definitely wouldn't use in actual everyday speech, um, which also kind of helps make the document sound more official. And so that's sort of a special case where the hair splitting between different meanings and different usages and the exact way that you word something is very, very, very important. So your affiliate link to recommend books on Amazon is broken. You should check it. I should. And this is actually a good point. When we use should as a correction, okay. Now I'm not taking offense to this. I'll preface that. But when we use should as a correction, right? People don't usually like to be corrected. So it feels like an imposition. Okay. Now, if I'm a teacher and I'm telling a student, it's like, okay, well, that's kind of my job, and you probably want to be corrected because you're trying to learn and trying to improve, right? But it does carry this sort of like, I think this is wrong, and so you need to change it, right? And so I'm sort of pushing that on you. It's not completely direct, and that correction is the main idea, but that can sort of go along with it. And so this could potentially be interpreted by me as like, hey, you messed up, you're not a good person, you're not taking care of your links and stuff, and what's wrong with you, right? Of course, I'm not taking offense, and I'm not saying that's how I feel, but somebody could maybe interpret it that way. But the idea of a correction is still there either way in this context. So nice little note. I'm glad. So this in context, right? We learn in context. That's very good. I will have to fix that. I shall fix that. Okay. Now to get into things that are a little more interesting. So we're going to go ahead and list out the modals here. I don't know why it's broken. It shouldn't be broken. I'll test it later and we'll see what happens. But so of the modals, so we saw shall, should, ought to. We're going to leave that off. We have can and could. These kind of go together. We have will and would. Those two kind of go together. We have might. We have may. Now, might and may, depending on the meaning, can kind of go together. We're going to come back to that, but they're two different things. And then, of course, we have must and have to. And then there's a special thing called modals of deduction. Modals of deduction. And several of these can be used, especially must and might and may. They can be used as modals of deduction when you're trying to deduce something, you're trying to figure something out. We're not really going to touch modals of deduction today. We're not really going to touch must and have to today because I know that's we'll talk about the basics, but it can get kind of complicated, especially if we talk about like past tense and this and that, whatever. So let's start with can and could, because this is usually one of the first things that you guys learn, but we're going to look at it in a sort of an interesting way. So first, can, and I might be missing a meaning. I don't think I am, but we have can as an ability. Okay, this is the very most basic use of can. you're describing an ability. So I talked about in I think the last lesson about mastering verbs, the last live lesson, that when we see something like to be doing, the be in the ing form, it's like one unit. It's not, I mean, it's two separate words that are being used in a grammatical arrangement, but it's one idea that expresses a particular thing, the ongoing action, right? And then we kind of talked a little bit related to that about how, can, it's changing the mode, right? That's why these are called modal verbs. They're not actually like verbs, like regular verbs that we think of, like go, eat, think, want, etc. Whether those are, well, I cannot think of that. There's like the two types of verbs, stative or my brain is not working right now. The active verbs or the stative verbs. So modals are sort of special class. They're helping verbs, just like we say, "Are you a teacher?" The to be there is just a helping verb to help us form the question. But the modal verbs, they change the mode. So if I say, "I can swim," okay, so I can swim. If I just say I swim, that's just a statement. It doesn't tell you when. It doesn't tell you, if I am going to, or if I might, or if I did. It just tells you that I have that ability. So when I want to express that I have that ability, then I can say I can swim. All right, great. So pretty simple, but that is acting as one unit. So in English, it's kind of an illusion because it looks like, I mean, technically within English, I'm adding this word, but what's really happening in the expression, what you are expressing is it's almost like you're doing this. Okay, it's one idea. So you're taking swim, and in other languages, not all other languages, but in many other languages, this is how it works. They'll actually change the verb itself. So like maybe it would be like swim, I don't know, and then they add like a to it, right? And then that a, so they say like swimma, and the indicates that it's an ability, right? In English, instead of modifying the word itself, we add the word can, or whatever modal we're trying to describe, but it's still one unit. Okay, it's one piece. So it is a modification to the verb. Of course, tense changes are also a type of modification, but that's a time modification. This is a different special kind of group of modification. So modal, right? Modification. We say mod with mod modification, but modal, they're related words. We just use o instead of . So it's the same root. So think of it as you are modifying the verb, but not in a tense, not in a time. Now, time, of course, can come into this, which we're going to come back to because that's relatively simple. Although it depends, especially with could. That's where it gets a little confusing. But you should get that basic idea. So think of this as one unit. Okay. And then that also makes it easier to speak, because instead of thinking of it in a very knowledge-based grammar way where you're thinking like, okay, I have to say, okay, so and then I know can expresses my ability. And so then I'm talking about swim. So I have to put the can here. Okay, I can swim. And for a lot of you guys in my audience, since you're intermediate to advanced, you're probably past that stage. But if you haven't really developed your speaking skills, which tend to be the lowest level, because speaking can take longer. Usually you don't start speaking because classes don't emphasize speaking. So you have to sort of practice that. By thinking of it as one unit and getting used to that, that can help you make it more automatic. Okay, so that's one part of a technique there. That's the basic use of can. It's just an ability. So that's how we express that in English. Now, can has another meaning, which some of you might be a little surprised by this. Some of you might have been told by other teachers that this is wrong and you should never say it. But of course, I'm going to tell you that that teacher is wrong because there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. You can use can for permission. There's When we talk about formality in English, which we're not going to get too deep into this, but when we talk about formality, in many languages, formality is formality. Like there's formal and there's informal. So if you don't know somebody, you use this language. If you do know somebody, you use this language. And it's pretty separated, right? It's like there's this or there's this. Um, in English, obviously, we do have language and ways to express things that sound more formal, and we have language and ways to express things that sound more informal or less formal. And that does exist. There are cases for that, but especially in American English, even more so than British English. I think Australian English is kind of similar to American English in this way. Because Australian English, I think, it's kind of like a British sounding other American English. I could be wrong, but that's like my impression of it. And so there's for permission, obviously, if you're asking permission, the more formal and polite you sound, the better it will be perceived by the person you're asking, right? And then the more likely they might be to say yes. So this is especially important for maybe children. But if you're in a situation where, say, there's a teacher like me, and say we're in an actual real live class, you might want to use a more formal version because not necessarily just because of the context, but because it just sounds more polite. American English formality is less about formality and more about politeness. That's the key idea. Okay, it's politeness. So um, it I think it functions a little bit differently than a lot of other languages. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to touch on a couple others here because I need to give you a framework. We have may for permission. So we'll say, may I, I don't know, may I leave? Okay. We have could I leave? And then we have can I leave? Forgot the question mark there, but I'm sure you know it's supposed to be there. Okay. So when we have may I leave, that's like the most formal, the most polite thing that you can do. But because of that, and because American English tends to be more informal in general, like just because I see a stranger doesn't mean I'm going to talk formally to them. We don't usually do that. Depends on the context, depends on subtleties. That's a whole different topic. But compared to what you might expect, or compared to maybe British English, we do tend to be more informal in general. So if you say, may I leave? That is definitely the most polite thing to do, but it can sound overly formal. Okay, even if you're in a formal situation. Now, if you are in a formal context, like with a teacher or whatever, um, it works. Okay, it's going to be fine. It's not a problem. But in everyday reality, the actual everyday reality of spoken American English, regardless of the context, it kind of feels stiff. It kind of feels too heavy, almost like this part of this is just my perception. I'm sure that there are natives that would maybe disagree with me on this, but it kind of just feels like you're trying to be too polite, right? Like you're really trying to be like, pretty please, may I leave? Is that okay with you? And so I don't know. Take that as you will. That being said, my recommendation is just you never have to use may for permission, okay? Because we have could, okay? Could, when we use it for permission, is neutral. It's a neutral politeness. It doesn't sound too polite and formal. It doesn't sound impolite, informal. It doesn't sound too direct, right? Directness versus indirectness is the thing that a lot of languages have, and we have different ways to phrase things, and the modal verbs help us do that in English. So if you say may for permission, sounds up here. If you say can for permission, it can sound down here, maybe too direct, too informal. Could is very, very, very neutral. Okay. Could will always work regardless of the situation. Doesn't matter if it's a formal situation, an informal situation. Again, don't think that like because I'm in this context or the situation, I have to be more formal or more informal. We tend to have sort of a neutral line of politeness that will always work. And could allows us to do that for permission. So my recommendation would be you can just always use could if you're asking somebody permission for something, or maybe like you're requesting. Permission and request aren't the same, but they're very similar. They tend to be tied. That will always work. So there you go. The can is used very, very, very commonly in everyday actual speech, but it does sound a little more direct. It does sound a little more informal. Um, and this is a good little point. So, like, I have a friend who is one of my roommates. I've known him since high school. Okay, obviously we're very good friends. We've known each other for a long time. Like, it's been what, God, like 15 years, something like that, more than that. So safe to say that we, would be on an informal basis. And yet, okay, let's say, because normally, I do my own thing and, he does his own thing. I have a car. If I need to go somewhere, I drive my car. He has a bike. If he needs to go somewhere, he takes his bike, whatever. But let's say, for example, I don't know, sticking with the transportation, because he has a bike, let's say he has a special case where, maybe he needs to go pick something up that he can't carry on his bike. And, he doesn't want to call an Uber or whatever. And he says like, hey, he's going to ask me like, this would be more of a request than permission. Either, well, permission if he wants to use my car, request if he wants to ask me to, take him to go get the thing, using my car. But either way, he could just say can. I wouldn't take offense to it. It's not a big deal, whatever. But it does still sound pretty direct. So if he wants to lighten it, make it sound a little more polite, a little more neutral, a little less direct, even though we're really good friends, even though we've known each other, for a super long time, and we joke with each other, and we're super informal most of the time. In order to make it sound more polite, he might say could. That's a possibility, right? So might, possibility, right? That's another topic we're going to get to. Again, we can't really describe any of this without referring to other phrasal verbs or modal verbs. So that is one structure that we use. Even if you have an informal situation with somebody, you can bump it up and make it sound nicer because he might feel like he's imposing on me, right? Whether that's using my car or having me take him using my car. It could be an imposition, and it makes it sound like what's being said underneath is like, I don't want to impose on you, but this is the situation and I am requesting your help, or I'm requesting permission to use your car so that I can go do that. So this is some of the subtleties of the language. Okay. So when we're asking for permission, most teachers will say may is the correct answer. That's what you should do if you're asking permission or you're requesting something. They might also say you could say could, but most teachers say, oh, you should never use can. And the stereotypical thing, so like if a student is in a class and maybe they have to go to the bathroom or something, and they say, teacher, could I go, or can I go to the bathroom? A lot of teachers will say, I don't know, can you? Because can is an ability, right? But in actual real everyday speech, can is a perfectly acceptable, more informal, more direct sounding alternative that we do use all the time. Okay, and by all the time, I don't mean in every case, I mean very frequently. Does could work in all situations? I've heard may I help you and can I help you? I don't think I've heard could I help you? Maybe it's not as common, but still correct. Okay, good. So context is important as well, right? I'm kind of talking in broad general terms that will apply in most cases. If we look at this, so may I help you? Okay, well, when would you use may I help you? Immediately what comes to my mind is like you, maybe you work at, or you're probably a worker, maybe at a restaurant, like at the front desk, or maybe a receptionist at the front desk, or some sort of service worker, right? And so what do we do in that type of business context, right? Remember, business context is not, now in a business context, most of the language is going to be the same for the most part. But especially for the workers, right? The customers, they can choose to be polite or not, and usually they'll be at least neutral. But for workers, because you want to have like a super good impression, um, you know, you don't want to upset the customer because like if you sound too direct or too rude, they might take offense and then you lose business. Okay, that's sort of a special context. Um, and so people expect you to have maybe a little bit of a higher standard in that context if you're a worker. And so may, again, it's that highest level. And so there, it doesn't really sound too informal. It doesn't really sound like a big problem. Um, that's it, but it's a special context. Okay. If you say, "Can I help you?" and you're a service worker, it depends. Depends on the maybe the type of business or whatever. Um, that is used because, as I said, it's very common, and a lot of people were just informal anyway. We don't really care based on the context or whatever. We're just like, okay, we're gonna use can. Um, but if you use can in that type of situation because it sounds the least formal and the most direct, um, it can sound like you feel the other person is imposing on you, and it bothers you, right? And tone, intonation is very important here because if you just like say you're a service worker, you see somebody, and you say, "Oh, can I help you?" That's okay. That's fine. Your tone is bright and cheery and fine. That's not a big problem. But maybe the customer might perceive it a certain way, but it probably wouldn't be a problem. It's I don't see that as a likely situation. Um, but if you say like, "Can I help you?" Now, of course, if you say like, "May I help you?" Okay, just by saying "may," even though my tone sounds like I'm bothered, I don't really want to help you. By using "may," it kind of just sounds like it helps make it sound better. It helps. It's like you're still expressing to the person that kind of like you don't want to be there, but you're doing it in a polite way, and so it's maybe a little more acceptable. But if you use can and do that, then the customer, whoever it is, might be like, "Well, fine, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm leaving." Like that's rude. So there's little subtleties of this. I don't think I've heard "Could I help you?" There's a reason for that, and that has to do with the meanings of "could." Okay. Um, so we wouldn't use "could" because "could" has let's see, one, two, three distinct usages. Maybe there's one I wasn't thinking of, but there's definitely three at least. Uh, and so we're gonna get into that next. It's a very good question, but because of the context and the situation, um, and because of what the different things that can mean, uh, we kind of just have these two options: may or can. So in that case, could actually doesn't work. And there are situations like that. That's where it gets a little complicated and messy. Again, it's not a big thing, but depending on the context, the situation, exactly what you're trying to express, sometimes one particular modal um, might sound like it's a completely different meaning because of the other meanings that it might have. And figuring that out is part of the hard part. um, Thumbs up. Yes, very good. Okay, so that's our permission/request structure. Now, might can also go into there, but that's not. That also sounds kind of indirect, like might I leave? Um, it's almost hypothetical. It's not common. You might hear it, but you never have to use it. I wouldn't. I wouldn't worry about that. That's really like an advance. Like if you're like already like advanced to upper advanced, that's a point that you would learn, and even then you never really have to learn it. I wouldn't worry about it. Teaches connected speech rules. So this lesson is more of a grammar lesson. I have plenty of lessons on rhythm and flow and linking, so you can go check that out. You can in fact, if you look up English Hacks 4 General Rules of Linking, sorry, I forgot the N there, or the G there, and 4 Big Exceptions of Linking, you should be able to find them. that gives you the base that covers like 80 to 90% of linking rules, connected speech. And then I have a couple other specific lessons that go into some other little details. But go check those out. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah. So that's our structure for permission or requesting. So you can see how these things are sort of related, and they're sort of, you know, we have can, could, and may, and it creates a structure of, you know, how polite you want to sound to express the same basic thing in most contexts. When we're doing, let's see here. So yeah, so the second use of could, which is usually taught as the first use of could. Here it's our second use because we talked about it in permission. But we have could. So let's say we have could for permission, which we talked about. We have could for the past of can. And this is where could gets a little complicated. And then we have could as a hypothetical. Okay, that would be like second conditional, third conditional. So we talked about permission. We don't have to worry about that. Now, when we talk about the past tense of modals, okay, can is the stupid one. Kind of will also, because of a special use of would. Would and will are connected. But really, it's can and could that is the stupid pair, because usually if you want to make a modal past tense, what you do is you add what looks like the present perfect. It's not actually the present perfect, but it has the same structure. So if I say, and we're going to talk more about this later, we might not actually have time to get too much into it, but if I say, I would go, okay, so that's like second conditional. So it sounds hypothetical. I would go. I don't have time. That's the reality. So I can't go, but I would go if I had time. Okay. Now, if it's third conditional, it's in the past. I can't change it. It's already done. I'm thinking of a different hypothetical reality in the past if something changed. I would have gone. Okay. And I'm using would for a reason, even though we haven't talked about will and would yet. So you add that have gone, it looks like the present perfect, and then now we know that it's in the past. So then would have gone is one unit. Okay. When we talk about can and could, okay, if you're talking about a past ability, okay, because that's the basic use of can, that's the basic meaning of can. So if I want to take that ability and move it into the past, so instead of saying I can swim, maybe I forgot and I don't know how to swim anymore, so I can't. Or maybe I had some sort of accident and I broke my leg and it didn't heal right, and so now I can't swim. Like maybe I can kind of float a little bit, but I can't effectively swim because of this physical issue. Okay, so now I say, well, I could swim, right? And this is where things get really stupid. Could is like the biggest single modal problem because of its three meanings. And depending on exactly what you express, we might interpret that as one of those three meanings, even though you didn't intend it. So if I just say I could swim with no context, that actually sounds hypothetical. But if the context is clear, like you can say like I could swim, but now I can't. Okay. Because of that, the thing that we use for clarity and what we would probably use instead, this is something that you kind of have to feel, and this is a little bit beyond, obviously, like feel English like a native. That's my whole thing. But we definitely don't have time to go into building the feeling. That's when we get into like the core idea and feeling of things, which we're probably going to have a follow-up, or I'm going to be making like a specific like video lesson for each of the modal verbs or modal verb groups to really get into that, because again, I could talk 2-3 hours on this, probably more. We're kind of just like covering the basics, giving you like maybe some subtle points, but we're not going to be able to cover every little nuance and whatever. But used to, okay, you probably have heard this. So used to do, not used to doing. Used to doing means accustomed. It is normal. So if you add the ing, that's important. because that will change the meaning of used to. But if you don't add the ing and you say used to do, that is past tense. So if you say, I used to be able to swim, okay, or I was able to swim. Again, this to be able and can often they mean the same thing. They talk about an ability. Able is an ability, but depending on context, they can actually be slightly different. Okay, and that's another point we're not going to be able to get into. I know there's so many little points. This is why this is a big topic. But if you say, instead of I can swim, you say, well, I was able to swim when I was a kid, but I broke my leg and now I can't. Or I used to be able to swim when I was a kid, but now I can't because I broke my leg. Okay. Very normal, easy way to say. If you say, I could swim when I was a kid, but now I can't because I broke my leg, that also works. But again, without that other context, if you just say, I could swim, it might be interpreted as hypothetical. So we have different structures or adding details in order to clarify exactly what you mean, because multiple meanings could be interpreted, and a native speaker will usually naturally just feel that and either add something or rephrase it using like used to or was able or whatever it is. So that's why you got to feel these things. Now, over time, of course, with just enough exposure and usage, you can build the feeling, but there's the English hacks way is ultimately to get to the essence of it. So, okay. So the past tense of can is could. All right. But there's also a past tense of could, right? Because it depends on how could is being used. Because you might think, well, how can there be a past tense of the past tense? Well, if you use could hypothetically, that's not in the past tense. This is what also confuses a lot of English learners, because we have, when we're talking about something that is hypothetical, this is where the subjunctive mood comes in. If you haven't heard about the subjunctive mood, it is a nice basic concept to know, but it's not something that you have to worry too much about, especially in English, because it's very much simplified in English compared to many other languages. We have a present subjunctive and a past subjunctive. That's not the subject of this lesson. We're not even going to worry about the present subjunctive here, because it's like, compared to the past subjunctive, it's past subjunctive. It's uncommon. And it is called the past subjunctive, but I think that's also misleading, because it's not even in the past. Okay. So right away in the grammar terminology, we have a confusion spot. And I'm sure there's a reason why it's called the past subjunctive. Probably because, I mean, could is like the past tense form of can, and maybe that's tied to it. I don't know. But I want you to ignore that idea of past versus present subjunctive. Just for now, in this case, we're just going to say it's subjunctive. Okay. Now, languages have tenses, modes, and moods. Okay. Tense, obviously, is the time, past, present, future. Mode, that's kind of what we're talking about. We're changing the mode of the verb, so it has a new form of expression, right? A different mode of expression. So instead of just I swim, I can swim. It's the ability to swim. And then we have the mood. Okay, and the mood is a very abstract concept, but normal everyday statements, whether that's I swim, I can swim, I will swim, I swam, past tense, et cetera, just regular normal tense changes, that you would expect. That's nothing fancy, nothing advanced. That's called the indicative mood. Indicative, to indicate, to point out, to show. Okay, it's just very basic. It's just reality. You're just like, that's a tree. I'm a teacher. You're just making statements about reality, basically. I feel good. Okay, even though it can be a subjective statement, subjunctive, subjective, they're related. Don't confuse that in grammar. If I feel good, that's an indicative mood statement. I'm just pointing out, I'm indicating this is how I feel. Okay. So it's just basic normal grammar that you learn from day one. There's the imperative mood. And I should probably click on these, right? So you can actually see them. Indicative mood, imperative mood. Imperative, right? And imperative, something that has to or should be done, we can say. So it is imperative that you do this, like you have to do this. A very strong word. This is commands. You don't even have to worry about imperative mood. Just think of it as the command form. That's usually what it's called. So if I say go, do it, eat. In English, it's very simple. You just use the verb and you add, whatever other words you need to express the command, like do your homework. But the verb is just the basic verb. It doesn't change, doesn't do anything. It's just a command. That's a mood. Okay. If the idea of mood is confusing, don't worry about it. Okay, I'm just giving you the basic concepts here so you can sort of separate and be like, oh, okay, so this is why we have these different expressions, different ways of expressing things, because there's actually different moods going on. With a subjunctive mood, that's not what I wanted. What happened to my chat? Apparently I clicked something I shouldn't click on. I lost my chat. I don't know. Oh, there it is. Okay. Subjunctive mood. So then this is, as it says, it's kind of more subjective. Again, it could be confusing. We don't want to confuse it with feelings and stuff, but in other languages, it gets more complicated. In English, it's relatively simple. And we're going to stick to these. Again, we're not worried about the present subjunctive. So when we say could, would. Okay. You can also use should in the subjunctive. You can use might in the subjunctive. Okay. Might doesn't change form, which is nice. But this would be, again, like the second conditional, the third conditional. It doesn't necessarily have to be a conditional, but that's usually the simple, most basic way to talk about it. So that's what we're going to do. So like I said, I would go, I would have gone, I could go, I could have gone. If you use could with this more hypothetical meaning, it's still ultimately, if we trace the roots, it's still tied into can, right? It's still sort of a modified version of can. But when we use it in this hypothetical sense, it's not, it's a form that, how do we express this? I'm trying to express this in a way that isn't super confusing. And that's the hard part. So if we just take the can, could complex, can, ability, basic statement, present tense, could maybe be pointing to the future. Doesn't matter. Could, past tense of can. Okay. But if we use could hypothetically, so I could go if I had time. Don't worry about the had part. That's a different part of the sentence. But I could go if I had time. So what this says is I don't have time. Now the had also looks like it's in the past tense. That's an illusion too. It's not past tense. It's also subjunctive. Okay. In English, the past subjunctive looks like the simple past. This is very confusing for a lot of people. So that second part of the sentence, just ignore that. That's also not in the past. It just looks like the past. But the first part, I could go. This is hypothetical. So it's pointing to present and future. So right now or next week, whenever the time is, whenever the context is, this is not the past. So this use of could here in this sentence does not mean the past in any way. It is not past. It does not refer to the past tense. Okay. It just looks like the past tense form of can. It still talks about an ability. That doesn't change. It's not permission. Okay, or anything like that. We have a comment that I can't read, so sorry about that. In like Arabic or something. But if you want to make that past tense, then again, like I was saying with would have gone, could have gone. So I could have gone. I'm Hussein, I'm from Iraq. Oh, well, welcome. Yeah, I couldn't read the Arabic, sorry. I could have gone if I had time. This is another topic when we talk about conditionals. Now it's supposed to be the past perfect, what looks like the past perfect, but we tend to just cut that and reduce it and just use what looks like the simple past. Again, that part of the sentence we don't care about right now. But I could have gone. Now, this is the hypothetical meaning of could in the past. Okay, so we use the present perfect, or what looks like the present perfect, attach it to a modal in order to make that modal past tense. The only exception to that is can, because can has its own regular form and it has its special past tense form of could. Okay. It would be a lot simpler if English just said, oh, I see. I missed a comment from King Lion. Sorry, I'll come back to that in a second. Just kind of sort of skipped over you there. What was I saying? Can, could. See, I lost my thought. You ruined it. No. Yeah. So can has its basic form and then its past form. It would be a lot simpler in English if could was not the past tense of can, and we just said like I can go, I can have gone. That's technically that. I think that does exist as a deduction, but that's very advanced. We're not worried too much about that right now, so we're gonna throw that to the side. Still talking about an ability, but it's not like the other modals. If you want to take could hypothetical, make it into the past, could have gone. Would hypothetical, would have gone. Will, you can also say will have gone, but that's the future perfect. Okay, so that's not subjunctive, that's not hypothetical, that's future perfect. That's actually a different that's regular tense. We have the present perfect, past perfect, future perfect. So will is usually used for the future, and so we use it to tie to the perfects. That's a different case. We say might have gone, so it's might in the past. Should have gone. That's, again, we talk about should, that could be an expectation, but that would be expectation in the past. That's deducting again. So I don't know, but I think this is what happened, or this might be what happened. So should, because it has multiple meanings as well, gets a little messy depending on exactly how you're using it. But could, would, and might, those are usually pretty simple for the most part. You can also say must have gone. That's modal of deduction. And that's very strong. Instead of might have gone, it sounds stronger. So again, that's a whole other topic. We're not going to worry too much about that here. When we get into modals of deduction later, we'll talk about that. I know this is kind of messing all over the place, guys, but that's because I'm trying to give you an overall big picture here. Okay. And we will also be talking. I'll also have lessons about conditional specifically. Like that might be a stream or a video at some point. So we're not going to dive too much into that here either. Let's talk about would, since we've already touched on it. But first, I have some things. I have a thing here. The difference between could and could have is confusing to me. Yeah. So I was just talking about that. I didn't. I didn't even realize that that's what your question was, or your statement was. Sometimes it's BV, I assume very, very. I don't know. Clear, but also there are some situations where I just don't understand the difference. Never found a normal explanation. Yeah, that's when we get into the subtlety of context and the different uses of could. So basically everything I just described. Now, if you just say could have, like I could have a car, obviously that's just like could swim, so, but if you say could have been, could have gone, that's it. So just because you see have, right? Have could be a main verb, or have could be part of that helping verb structure that we use with the what looks like the present perfect or whatever it is. So that adds to the confusion, but all the basics I just talked about could tie into all that. That's very direct. Oh, I want you to teach me American English. That is very direct. Do you have an Instagram page? I want to talk to you privately. I don't do Instagram. There's a page that exists, but I don't. It's been like a long time. I don't do Instagram. I decided to stop the Facebook because of Facebook's stupid policies. I have YouTube. Technically, there's a TikTok. YouTube is basically my thing. I teach on italki. There's a link in the description to my teacher profile. italki. And you can message me there if you want. But yeah, I don't struggle with modal verbs too much. They're interchangeable with Spanish modal verbs like 99% of the time. Well, Spanish doesn't have modal verbs. Technically, yeah, kind of, but it's to me, it seems very different. And that's because, so like in Spanish, you have like poder, right? So it's like can, to be able, whatever. And then if you want to say like I can go, so you say like puedo ir, right? So you modify poder based on person and tense. So puedo ir, podré ir, podría ir. And it gets very, very confusing, especially when you get into like the conditional form in Spanish plus poder, because then it's like a conditional can, and I guess that's could. And so it kind of matches up. It kind of makes sense, but it's also, it's very uncomfortable for us because we're not used to adding. I mean, I guess we kind of do the same thing. We don't think of it the same way. It's a little confusing to get for us. But that's a different language. So if we talk about would, okay, so will and would. Will obviously is just the future. Now, will versus going to, that's a whole topic in itself. Very basic idea. Will sounds like a statement, like a solid statement in the future. So I will go. Just, bam. Okay. If you say I'm going to go, it sounds more like a plan. So they're both about the future, but will sounds maybe more solid, more like an intention. Which intention and plan, I mean, okay, whatever, but you intend to do it, so it's like yes, okay, and oh yes, I'm going to. See, sometimes when we're explaining will, we say going to, that it gets confusing. I'll have a much clearer lesson on that when I talk specifically about that, because I'm going to draw some certain points. But going to, it just sounds like a plan. Like it's not a statement of what will happen, but it basically is, because if you say you're going to do it, then you should probably do it. Notice you should probably do it, right? That's obligation, because you said you would, will, past. We're going to get to that. See, they're all connected depending on what we're expressing. And so, yeah, going to just doesn't sound as firm. It just sounds like this is what I plan to do. Okay, not necessarily what I will do, but I probably will do. So they're a little bit different. They're not exactly the same. I'm an neighbor. I want to know pronunciation of flap T. Look up English hacks, the 4 T's. The four T's of American English. Something like this. And then also in the mouth posture lesson, I've talked also a little bit about that as well. The phase 2A mouth posture. I have tons of lessons on this channel. If you're new here, just like I have playlists for different things you can find. I've covered all the sounds. Any sound you want to learn, you can find it on my channel. That's not our topic today. We're not talking about pronunciation. Pronunciation is a different day. I think the difference between could and could have mostly depends on what the person is trying to say. It only depends on context, if it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, context is very important, and what the person is trying to express is very important. That's really the whole message here. It's not grammar, like this means this. No, it's what do you want to express? How do you express that? The grammar is just the description of that. If you get lost in the grammar description, then it feels very mechanical and like, oh, I have to use this if I want to express that. But then you never feel it. It's all theoretical and knowledge. And you have to actually, it's like based on this specific context and what I want to describe or express in this specific context, what would I use? And so that's why you have to build the feeling for the modal verbs and the sort of shades between them. It's not enough just to memorize the grammar. Okay. So will is the future. We can call it a real future. We use that in the second conditional too. I will go if I have time. So I don't know if I will have time, but if in the future that is true, then I will go. Okay. Um, and that ties right into would. So will and would, there are, I think, 3 uses of would. I only have 2 of them down because the other one I always forget, and I think it's more abstract. It doesn't matter as much. But the basic, most common use of would that you're going to see is in the conditionals, or in just a hypothetical type statement. If we go first conditional, okay, first conditional, and we say, I will go. So that is, sorry, that's just a basic statement. I will go if I have time. Okay. So that's just a basic statement. Like I said, I don't know if there will be time in the future, but if there is, I will go. If I'm not busy, right? So that is first conditional. And that is a real possibility. Real possibility. Okay. Now, in the first conditional, you can also use can. You can also use might. Okay. Will is just sort of the basic first entry point. Again, we're not going to talk completely about conditionals here, but this is important between will and would. So if I say I will go, that's a real possibility. So it has a real chance of happening. It is just a statement of reality. I don't know what the future has in store, what it holds, what will happen. I don't know if that time will exist for me to not be busy, but it could happen. Okay. And this is partially, it's not just a grammar thing like, oh, I have to use this because of this. No, it's subjective to some, not subjunctive, subjective to some extent, depending on how I'm thinking about it. So if I think that it is possible that I will have time, then I say I will. Okay. But if I want to make it more hypothetical, I say I would go if I had time. Okay, again, don't worry about the second part of the sentence. This is now subjunctive, not past tense. Okay. So would is the hypothetical form of will. So now we're in the second conditional. Okay. So I would go if I had time. Now, either right now in this present moment, okay, this is where it gets a little muddy because will is the future. But would, it could be it's probably going to point to the future at least, right? But it could also refer to the present. So like right now, let's say I'm doing this live stream and my friend, opens the door and he says, hey, do you want to go watch a movie? And I say, I would go, but I'm in a live stream. That's happening right now. Okay. So you can use that, this hypothetical, like I'm in a live stream, so I can't. But if the reality were different, hypothetically speaking, right? If reality were different and I were not doing a live stream right now, then yes, I would like to go to the movie. So I will go with you and whatever. But this is happening, so I can't just, leave you guys. Um, so here we are. So now I'm talking about it in a hypothetical way for the present moment. This is another reason why I don't like it being called the past subjunctive, because it can refer to something happening now. Okay, it's just hypothetical. So the second conditional is often called an unreal possibility, because it's hypothetically possible, but it's unreal because it can't happen. There's some issue, like I don't have time, I'm in the live stream, whatever it is. And so I'm expressing like if things were different, right? In a different reality, this is the current reality, this is what's real, but I'm talking about this unreal reality that doesn't exist because this is the actual reality. Okay. If that's confusing, don't think about it that way, but hopefully that helps make sense. Now the would could also refer to the future, right? So same thing, I would go if I had time. So now instead of right now, let's say my friend asks me, hey, this Friday, do you want to go to the movies? Okay, so same thing. I say I would go if I had time. So I know that I'm not going to have time on Friday because I'm just so busy that day. So no time for the movies. So now it's not about the present, it's about the future. And so I'm saying, well, hypothetically, again, different reality. I know I'm not going to have time, but in a different reality, if I did have time, then again, that's not past tense. um, then yes, I would go. So it's talking about something that's not real. Okay, and that's where it gets a little abstract and confusing for a lot of people. So again, hypothetical present, hypothetical future. Then if we get to would have gone, again, that's third conditional, that's the past. So now let's say it's not now, it's not Friday. Let's say today is Monday, and let's say on Friday, I really wish that I had the time, right? On Friday, but I didn't have the time. That was the reality on Friday. So I couldn't go to the movies, right? So then now on Monday, I look back because my friend went to the movie and it was a great movie and he had a great time. And then all these good things happened to him. He found $100 on the floor and just all these amazing things. And so now I'm like, oh, that sucks. I should have gone. Okay. So now I look back and I say, yeah, I probably would say I should have gone to express because I missed all that stuff. But if I just want to make a statement of it, like, well, I would have gone, right? That would be what I wanted to do, but I didn't have time. Okay, now didn't is in the actual past because everything's in the past. I know it's confusing, but I would have gone. So it's still would hypothetical, but once we had that have gone and we attach it to would, now that's one unit, would have gone. Now it's a hypothetical past. This is an unreal possibility in the third conditional, unreal possibility, and it's unreal. Sorry, not unreal possibility. It's an impossibility. It's an impossibility because you can't change the past, right? An unreal possibility, the second conditional, who knows? Something might change, but your what you believe will happen, or how you're what I'm thinking of, what you're expecting to happen, or how you're thinking about it, right? You're looking at it as like it's not possible, right? So it's an unreal possibility. Technically, it could happen, but you don't think that it can, right? Where in the third conditional, the past, you can't change the past, so it's just an impossibility. Okay, and that's when we add that make would into the past tense. That's what it's talking about. So it's still hypothetical, just in the past instead of present or future. Past. I don't know why I said past. Sometimes things come out weird. Past. The other use of would, we're definitely over time. I'm going to tie this up. I also need to come over here really quick. 1 second. So many notifications. It's not what I want. Go away. Yeah, start that. Sorry, I have to get my work started, but I have to pause it for a second so I can finish this up with you guys. Would in the past. What are we doing here? He has an italki. I forgot to say hello. But Swifty. It's a trap. You guys are funny. Yeah. I'm glad that both of you regularly come to the streams because sometimes it's just hilarious. Anyway, would as a past habit. So this is where things get really messy and confusing because we're like, okay, so will is the future, and then would is the hypothetical form of will. And if we're using would hypothetically, but we add what looks like the present perfect to it, now it's a hypothetical past. And then but then we can also use would directly to talk about a past habit. Yes. Again, there's a core essence, which we're not going to get into now. I haven't fully mapped it out, but there is a core essence, just like with the prepositions. it's not necessarily a logic to them in this case, but there is a core essence. There's always a core essence to these things. And that happens through over time through etymology and adaptations, new uses of words, things like that. But it all goes back to a single core idea. So if I say, when I was a kid, I would go to the beach every day. Okay. So this is the same as used to do. Okay. Now we talked about earlier, remember with could, instead of saying I could swim, because that might be interpreted as a different meaning of could, you could say I used to be able, or I was able. Okay. So this is not the without the able part. So it's if you say I used to be able, that's now can, technically a form of can, because we're using the be able. But if we use used to do, used to go, used to see, used to eat, that is the other way to describe that is just would. So they're interchangeable. When I was a kid, I used to go to the beach every day. When I was a kid, I would go to the beach every day. There's a little bit of a different feeling to them. I'm pretty sure they're always interchangeable and mean the same thing. So it's just another way to express it. Now, why? That's a good question. We're going to have to figure that out when I go and fully map everything out. But I'm sure there's a reason there. So would is all over the place. It can refer to the present, it can refer to the future, it can refer to the past, but it always has, well, I guess not always, it usually has this hypothetical feeling and meaning under it. When we use it as that past habit, it's not hypothetical. Okay, it's an actual statement of a past habit. So there has to be something deeper under the surface that allows would to be used in that way. And I'm going to find it. Don't worry. Greetings, sir. How can I serve you? At professionally say what? Did I miss something? How can I serve you? Yes, that's actually another good point there. So if you use can with, say, serve, that doesn't sound very direct or impolite because you're using serve. So like, how can I serve you? You say, how may I serve you? That sounds even more polite, maybe more better. But because of the specific verb that we're using, that actually sort of balances out can. That's an interesting, good little point there. I don't know if that was your intention, Abdullah, but made me think of that. Okay, so that gives us a good picture of should, can, could, would. We talked about may as permission in that structure. Definitely going to run out of time. I did want to touch on all of the basic ones here. So let's quickly go through. I'm not going to spend as much time on these. But we have these here. So we have might. So there's might, real. These are just my notes. This isn't grammatically correct. But might, real, possibility or deduction, might, permission, sounds indirect, almost hypothetical. Okay. So might for permission, I would just ignore. You might hear it, but it's like, oh, might I take a look? Might I help you with that? It sounds kind of fancy, kind of formal. It's not something you ever have to use. I would ignore it. We'll put that to the side. You also won't hear it very often. It does exist. It actually, to me, sounds a little bit more British, but it does exist in American English. With the basic meaning of might, there's two uses. One, the most common is just a possibility, and the second is deduction. It could be used as a modal of deduction. So if you're trying to figure something out that, like, I don't know what happened, but maybe it was this. So like, or maybe you're trying to figure out what will happen in the future. So it might, and that's where it ties back to possibility. So, but if I say, well, I'm not going to get into that because we can get to the past tense. I'm all over the place here. Basics of might, possibility, I might go. That's just a statement. So instead of saying can, if I might go, that means basically might is like maybe. It's sort of like 50-50. Okay. So maybe I will go. That's like 50-50. I don't know. I might go. That means basically the same thing. 50-50. I might be able to go. So if you want to use might with the idea of can, the ability, we don't say might can. We can't use two modals like that. So we're going to have to use be able. So be able is very useful because it allows us to express can when we don't have the option to actually use the word can itself. But again, to be able can actually be a little bit different depending on the context. So 50-50 possibility, just a statement of possibility. That's all it is. So you don't know if you will want to, you don't know if you will be able to, you don't know if you will be allowed to. The exact context, maybe you need to get permission, maybe you you may or may not have the ability because of some restriction, because maybe like you don't have your car and you need your car because it's in the mechanic, and so like I don't know, if I get my car then I can go, but if I don't get my car back before that then I can't go. So the exact context doesn't necessarily matter. It's just you're expressing like maybe. That's all it really means. And it's kind of 50-50, as I said. So it's up in the air, we would say. It's indeterminate. Okay. So might, the basics of might is very, very simple. When you put might into the past tense, might have gone, that is deduction. So we probably wouldn't use I with might because usually but it is possible if like you don't remember. So he might have gone. So this is like, I don't know, but it's a possibility that he went. Right? So he might have gone to the beach. And you're trying to deduce that because you say, well, it's 12 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, usually he's at the beach, but sometimes he's not. And I go to his house and he's not there. So I say, well, he might have gone to the beach. Now, if it's usual, you probably say, well, he probably went to the beach. He must have gone to the beach. Sounds stronger, more likely. So that gets into shades of modals of deduction. But might have gone, in that case, it's not making it past tense. Well, technically it is past tense because you're saying I don't know what happened in the past to cause him to not be here. I don't know if he went to the beach. I don't know if, just why he's not here. So it is technically connected to the past, but you're trying to deduce what explains the present, like what happened to explain this present situation. So it's an interesting thing. This is one reason why we use what looks like the present perfect to tie those together, because the present perfect usually connects a past moment to the present moment. And this is a special way to do that. So we use it for deduction. Okay. I also have here. So may for permission, we talked about. May for possibility. You can use may and might interchangeably. I might go, I may go. My recommendation, if you want to keep things very simple, you never have to use may as a possibility. If you're in a very formal situation or you have like maybe a business email or something, then probably you should use may, but those are special cases. Because it does sound a little more formal. It sounds a little more fancy. But the way that most people use them, I think, is like if we want to express that sort of 50-50, more or less, I don't know, situation, possibility, then I think might in American English is probably more common, but we use may as well. So we kind of just whatever comes out. It doesn't really matter. So there's a connection there between may and might, and why is a good question. We'll have to figure that out later. Must and have to, basics only. So keep things simple because some people are like, what's the difference between must and have to? Must is an obligation. Now, should is also an obligation, but should sounds lighter. Okay, it doesn't sound as strong, where must is like absolutely 100%. This is like, do it. Basically, it's almost like a command, like you must go. It's almost the only more direct way to express that is to say go, like give a direct command. So must and should are connected there. You can use must have gone in the past. That's not the basics, but that's another modal of deduction, just to kind of tie that off. And modals of deduction, we'll talk about that more in another session. But have to, there's a reason why have to means must, and that gets into the logic of prepositions. So I talked about that in the book. Again, we don't have time for that here, but we will be talking specifically about that at another time. The basic thing that I'll give you now, if I say I have to go, so have, if I have a car, have has an essence, and that essence applies to the main verb, to the helping verb, like in the perfect tenses, and to have to. Okay, it's 3 different expressions of the core meaning of have, which I have roughly mapped out already. But if you have something, the basic meaning of have means own or possess. Okay, it belongs to me, or it's in my possession. Maybe it doesn't belong to me, but I have it. It's in my possession. So one of those two. Those are very similar ideas. So if I have a verb, right? How do you have an action? Okay. Well, of course, we use to. This is one reason why we use to point to verbs. The verb itself is like go, swim, whatever. It's not actually to go, to swim. There's a reason why we do that, but that's not actually the verb. The verb isn't the to part. The to points to the verb, and then we use that in certain structures to help point to the verb. So when we say have to go, it creates a combined idea where conceptually we have the owning or possessing of something plus a verb, and if you own or possess a verb, it creates this idea of the obligation to do that verb. Okay, so if I have to go, if I own going, which is a weird way to express it, we don't quite think of it that way, but if I own going or I possess going, then it means I have the obligation to go. It's very, very abstract, and I tried to explain that in more clear detail in the book. I think also I made a video about to, and I talked about it in there, so you can actually find it on YouTube and just go to like the have to section. But yeah, there's a reason why have to means must, and must and have to are pretty much always interchangeable. Have to, I think, is more common. Must also, again, it sounds kind of stronger. Probably 80%, 90% of the time we use have to, because must can sound very, very strong. So yeah. And that's about it for today. So that gives you guys a good general overview picture and how I kind of think about these and approach these. We'll be getting more into, like, if we have, again, either way, I'm going to be making lessons about these topics and stuff, whether through lives or through actual videos later. Probably both, I guess. But we'll be getting into like the essences of, can and could and should and would and all those things. We'll be getting into like etymological details to help understand, why that happens, why that works. I tried to do that with the prepositions too. Anytime there was relevant etymology, history of words, etymology information, I added that as supplement because I found that in my research, and it helped me find and understand the essence of that preposition. So knowing where the word came from and how it sort of evolved over time and gained new meanings it's really like tracing the roots of a tree or the roots of a plant. That's what we're talking about, right? There's the to plant, the on plant, the in plant, and that has roots underneath. And etymology helps us actually map out and trace those roots and find the core, like the core root, strong root, the tap root, we would say. So that's kind of my whole approach to that. So we're definitely going to be talking more about that later. I was talking about the comment above me. Oh, I didn't even see that person. Sorry. Hi. So that's why Abdullah is the unofficial moderator. Stop with the ... at the end of every single sentence. You get off cool, dry vibes because of that. Well, that could be interpreted a particular way. We do use ... to as a form of expression. I refuse to believe that we live in the 21st century and we still have people who discriminate against non-lovers. Okay. Always you two bickering in the comments. It's like literally half the comments is just you two, which is entertaining for me as long as it remains civil. Shok is here. Shok. I just call you And just take off the Q. Say call you show, but that would probably be even worse. I don't know. Blah 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 blah. Yeah. Oh. We're getting some more moderation going on. I think you're edging in on Abdullah's territory here. Of 2 moderators. Very clear, very interesting. You're welcome. Yeah, of course. These are children's play. Yes. So I don't think we ever make that plural, because I know that you're saying like these are. We say these are child's play. Like we just child's play is the expression. So yes. All right. Well, there we go. See, I also like I always like building things up from the basics. So I know even though a lot of this information, like for some of you, hopefully some things were new or interesting or useful. For others of you, you're like, yeah, I already know that. But I can always refer back to this and be like, hey, this was sort of the introduction where we started laying things out. And so if somebody later comes along, I can always point back to this one, at least until I have a more solid, like actual polished lesson to lay everything out. But anyway, my phone just keeps going off. I'm getting so many emails and messages and I have no idea why. Delivered. I got a package. Yay. Okay, good. So I will see you guys tomorrow. As I said, the StreamYard free plan is going to run out because we're using up so much of the free hours. So I'll just switch to YouTube when that happens. I don't know if it'll like cut off the live stream if I run out of time. We probably now have like 5 hours left or something. So if we're in a stream and all of a sudden it just stops, I'm sure it'll notify me, but that will probably be why over the next maybe 5 or 6 days or so. But yes, tomorrow we have a Q&A session. I still have to, I forgot to label or schedule some more of these. So we're going to schedule a few more. I've just been overbearingly busy the last week with everything extra that's going on. So I'm trying to keep up and not doing a very good job. So I'll try to make sure to schedule those today. That way you'll know what's coming up. But yes, I will see you guys next time. Thank you all. And if you have any ideas for or like future content on modals, then you can leave them in the comments after the stream ends and we'll consider that for the future. So I'll see you guys next